My name's Nick Olson. I'm from PredictWind, and we're going to talk today about uh, some of the tools that you can use with PredictWind for the um, Pacific puddle jump. We are mainly going to look at sailing routing from Panama to French Polynesia, and we'll just go through a couple of things before we start actually looking at that in detail. So within PredictWind, we have two main pieces of software. We have the PredictWind app, which is the same as what we'll be looking at today on the PredictWind forecast website. And then we have the Offshore app, which is what you can use if you are using a slower satellite connection. And then there is, but you can actually also use that if you're using a Starlink connection, because it will save your data offline. So if I just flick over to the Offshore app, it's the nice thing about it is if you do a download and you turn your sat connection off, which people often do with a Starlink to save power, your routing will still be there. So we will have a look at the Offshore app. And obviously if you're using an Iridium Go or an Iridium Go exec, the Offshore app is the only way to do it. If you are on Starlink, you can use the PredictWind forecast site for your routing as well. And so, yeah, we will look at that, and we will set up our routes in there and our polars and go through that. So I know that we wanted to talk about, I guess before we get into that, I will just have a little look at the Starlink, because I think lots of people have it these days. We are super fans of Starlink, and we've seen a massive uptake of PredictWind users Starlink. What we are concerned about is people that don't have a backup. We see it a lot where people's Starlinks go down for whatever reason, whether they've got their plans wrong, whether they've got power issues, it doesn't reboot. So not having a backup, also having something to get off the boat in a hurry. So we do recommend having an Iridium Go or an Iridium Go exec as a backup. We have backup plans now, which are a much cheaper monthly rate than a full plan. And it means that you've got a device there that you can use if you need to. And you could, if you had a long way to go in your journey and you'd had a problem with your Starlink, you can actually, if you've got it on a basic plan, you can message us, and we can actually even upgrade your plan for you. So 100% please have a backup. Also super good for your tracking, is you can use a Go or an exec as you're tracking on one of these backup plans. And so for anyone that is using an exec or Starlink and you want to track, we have, and we are doing tracking for the rally, we have a few ways to track, but the best way, if you don't have a Go, is to have a data hub. And I'll just click on the data hub and we'll talk about that briefly. With the data hub, on an exec or a Starlink connection, we can see your wind speed and direction coming off your boat if you've got it connected to your NMEA. Super useful for people watching you, super useful if you have an external weather router looking after you, as well as using your PredictWind routing. It's, you can do a lot of things with the data hub, aside from having your tracking showing you, your tracking page showing you your wind speed and direction, and your boat speed. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Something that will be super useful going into the Pacific is the over the horizon AIS. This gives you the ability to see boats within a 300 nautical mile range. So good for planning ahead for your for your watches and that, whether you're going to be coming into an area of high traffic or not, or fishing fleets that you might want to avoid, and so you can route around them. So yeah, it's this over the horizon AIS is pretty cool. It uses it brings in the satellite AIS and can display it on your chart plotter or any other device that can um, display that data. So you could have an iPad with um, some software on there that can display your AIS data. Polars, we're going to talk about polars today, and so you can the data hub can automatically update your polars. A lot of the polars from manufacturers are usually pretty optimistic. They don't take into account that you've put an extra 2 tons of gear on your boat, and that you don't sail it as a performance vessel the whole time. So the AI polars automatically updating via the data hub is a very nice feature to get better routing. And why I say that you would get better routing is that the more accurate your polars are, the more accurate the routing is. So, knowing where you're going to be in 5 days, 10 days time can be, inaccurate polars can make that throw more errors in there than needed. And hopefully very soon we'll have the Anchor Alert app. But there's a bunch of other stuff that you can do with the data hub and sharing NMEA data around the boat to different devices. You can even steer your boat on Aquamap and other things. Yeah, so it does a bunch of stuff. If you are using an exec, you've got your optimized email in there as well. And we've just put a whale watch thing in there, and we are looking at putting the orca thing in. Not that that matters quite such a thing in the Pacific, but well, with the French, where you're going, and but nice thing to have. Anyhow, I won't talk about that anymore. If I probably should have said at the start, if you do have any questions, Kieran is there to answer questions in the Q&A. That's who the other Zoom is. Or reach out to our support team. So we do onboardings and whatnot. If you have any questions with the data hub or any of the other PredictWind stuff, so people will talk to you one-on-one if need be. But do reach out to the support team because they're awesome. So obviously we have all your general forecasting tools. If I zoom out, what am I on? I'm on a currents map. And let's change it to wind, and I'll zoom out. Yeah, so like any weather tool, you can have your weather maps on. Something that you'll see on here is all these sort of coloured, shaded areas on the map. And what they are is they are GMDSS forecasts, so written text forecasts written by the relevant Met service. So for whichever part of the world you're in. And if you click on one of these areas, it will tell you what the warning is. And then you can click on that and it will tell you the details of that. In this highlighted part are the details of what that warning is. And so it's a pretty nice way to have a visual on these written forecasts and alert you to things going on. We do actually have alerts that you can set up for this that is brand new. So you can be alerted if there's going to be thunderstorms for your forecast area. So I've got my location set up in just north of Tahiti there. And I can set up an alert and down here in tools. and forecast alerts. And I can come in here and I can set up an extreme weather alerts. So I can just turn them on, and I will get warned if those thunderstorm areas are going to be coming towards me. I'll actually get a push notification on my phone or on my email. So because I've set this up on here, it'll go to my email. But if I do it on my phone or my tablet, it'll send push notifications to those devices that I'm logged into. We specifically set this up and developed it from what we saw in the Med last year, where there was some events where people didn't feel that regular forecasting was giving them the alerts that they needed. And so this is because and often they were forecast by those regional forecasting authorities. And so they are updated in the GMDSS. And so we have taken that, put alerts on it, and you will get push notifications if you turn that on about these extreme weather events. GPS tracking is part of the rally benefits. We will set up a tracking page for the event and for the individuals for the period of the rally. So do that. It's super important for people to know where you are. One of the reasons why we like people to be tracking on an Iridium device that it is constantly tracking, that you're not turning it off, is that if the biggest time step of us not knowing where you are, or someone knowing where you are, and you disappear, is at least it's only an hour old, not 12 hours old. If, let's say, you've turned your Starlink off, there's no positions coming through for 12 hours, and something happens, that your last known position is 12 hours old. So having an up-to-date tracking page is pretty important. Kieran can probably put some a link to some information about the tracking in there. I'll just come back to this forecast maps page, tables page maps. So everything that we look at in here is location based. So you'll see here I have a bunch of locations set up. When I go to the map, you'll see my location set up there. And so if I look in the tables or the graphs, it's just for that spot. So that's great if I'm in a particular location, but obviously when I'm doing passages, this is not the information I want. Maps are very useful with my wind and my gust and my cape and my different weather models. But if, when you're a moving target as such, you need to use a tool such as weather routing. So we'll go and have a look at departure planning and weather routing, and set up those tools and talk through it. So we'll actually start in departure planning. So we do have sail planning and power planning. So if you've got a powerboat, you can use these tools. But we'll go into sail planning. I'll have a sip of my coffee. So whether we're in weather routing or departure planning, they are both run by our weather routing algorithm. And actually, just for simplicity, let's go into the weather routing here and then sail routing. And you'll see it's essentially the same looking page, but just we want to set up our routing preferences. And so I can do that in departure planning or weather routing, but I don't want to confuse anyone. So we'll just go into weather routing and do it so that we're all on the same page. And I'm going to click on this button up here that says routing preferences. Before you use the weather routing tool, you need to set up the details of your boat. If you don't, you will be using a default polar, which is a Beneteau 40.7, which is not the worst thing in the world, but as I said before, we want to get our polars as close as possible to our actual performance. So there's a few ways that we can do that. As I mentioned before, if we have a data hub, we can use an AI polar, and we would need to have set our base polar first. So we would have selected from predefined or advanced. If we had a polar on the advanced, we would have select our polar type. I don't have a data hub set up in my house, so I'm not going to use the AI polar, but and we do have instructions on how to set that up, and our support team can help you with that as well if you are going to use the AI polar. But for today, we are going to look at the predefined polar. So I've clicked on this predefine button here, and you'll see I was actually at the Auckland Boat Show yesterday, and I was talking to a gentleman who had a Bavaria 44, and so we were going through his routing, and yeah, and having looking at his routing. But let's set up something else. When I was at the boat show yesterday, I quite liked. Quite liked the FP 47. I don't know whether it was exactly that model, but anyhow, we'll use, actually, let's not use that one. That's a crazy looking polar. There we are. Much more sensible looking polar. So you can see there, I can see my wind speed and my boat speed is shown in this curve over here. So anyhow, there is a massive list of boats here. And you can, if your one's in here, you can select that boat type, or select one that's close to it. We do even have some generic ones up here, 40-foot catamaran, 50-foot catamaran, monohulls, etc. So yeah, if your one's there, you can select that, and that would be your starting point for your polars. So I'm just probably taking a step back. What your polar is how fast we think, well, the software thinks your boat is going in any given condition. So whether it's 15 knots at a true wind angle of 100 degrees, and you're going 9 knots, and then, or if you're sailing upwind at 55 degrees and 15 knots, and you're going 6 knots of boat speed, whatever that is, that's what this curve is representing. And we can also see all the numbers for this if we look in the advanced. And I'll quickly show you that, because if you want to adjust your polar and manually update it, which I've done it before, it's not that hard. You can copy this predefined polar. I can copy that across to the advanced polar, and you'll see here we have this table. And so here down this column, we have the wind speeds, 4 knots, 6, 8, 10, 20, 25, and then our true wind angle, so 60. So she doesn't sail upwind too well, this FP50. So 60 looks like it's upwind angle, and until it gets over sort of 10 knots, it's 10 knots. It doesn't actually sail super fast either, upwind. But if these, so this is my true wind angle here, 60. And then, so let's look at this 10 knots one. So 10 knots of wind speed, 60-degree true wind angle, we're doing 5.54 knots. At 70 degrees true wind angle, still in 10 knots of wind speed, we're doing 6.72 knots, 75 degrees, 7 knots. And if I come over here, I'm sure that this boat goes faster when it's around 120, 110. Yeah. We're doing 8 knots at 110 and 10 knots of breeze, which is actually pretty quick for 10 knots. 20 knots, if I come down here, I know I can change that there. There. How do I unhighlight it? Anyhow, yeah, so if we look at 25 knots, we can see as we come across, all our different polar numbers. So you can actually adjust these numbers to suit how fast your boat actually goes. But as I say, if you have the data hub and the AI polar, it will do it all for you. Anyhow, so we'll just leave that set up in the advanced, whoopsie, leave that set up in the advanced polar. We could stick on the predefined, but let's, pretend that we're experts and we'll go for the advanced polar. One of the reasons I want to do that is I actually want to adjust my displacement down here. So we'll get to that in a second. You'll see here we have a button that says we'll motor at 5 knots when the boat speed is less than 4 knots. So that's if your sailing speed falls below 4 knots, we'll start motoring. So we might motor at 6 knots. And just so that's when the routing takes us into areas, we end up in areas of no wind. We can choose whether we want to sit there and wait it out, or whether we want to motor through those areas. So we can turn this motoring option on, and the router will take care of that. So, and this is a course adjustment of our polar. So we can change this. So at the moment it's at 110%. So I'm thinking I'm going to sail faster than my polar. Let's just put that on 100, assuming that I've got this polar perfect. And then at night, I know that I'm not going to sail as well. So I'm actually going to put that at 90%. Sailing at night's harder. I might sail more conservatively at night. So yeah, I've just got that 10% slower than my normal polar, and I might even put that down to 70%. I might only ever sail at night with my main and my jib up. I might never fly any other sail at night, or I might put a reef in my main at night just for safety. So we can change our nighttime polar. If I come down here and I look at the wave polar, so this is for this passage that you're doing, I would 100% recommend you have this set up. This is a very, very, very cool feature. It will tell you how your boat's going to react at any time throughout the route, according to the boat's dimensions and design and displacement. And so we'd make a simple 3D model of the boat, and then the wave state, so the wind wave, the primary swell, the secondary swell, and the tertiary swell are all calculated against your boat's dimensions, and it gives you a roll, a vertical acceleration, and a boat slamming output in the routing. Don't need to necessarily understand exactly what I'm saying there right at this moment, because we're going to look at that when we go into the routing. But it's a very nice feature that we've had a lot of feedback, and it's something that not many. Well, I don't know of anyone else that actually gives you the ability to see this, and even personalized weather router, unless they were using our tools, they wouldn't be able to calculate this stuff in their heads. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So as I said, we would often we put more gear on our boats than the design weight. These are all from the design weights. So I've got an extra ton of gear on my boat, so I've increased my displacement, waterline, beam, draft. So they're on. So we want this wave polar on. This is not really so important for the route that we're doing. We can put a depth avoidance on. If we're doing coastal passages, this depth avoidance is critical. Might put it at 5 meters. And it's not a nav tool, but it will give you, any router that's sending you over land is not a good router. So we also want the routing to use the tidal and ocean currents. Makes a huge difference for the passage to French Polynesia from wherever you're going from. There is a lot of currents out there. I think there's a gentleman out there at the moment who's lost his rig, has a jury rig up, and I think he's sailing against some of these currents, and it's making his slow progress even slower. Well, that was the last time I looked, about a week ago. So anyway, having the router will optimize to use these to your advantage. I got told by a gentleman that I know that he was working with a powerboat, and the fuel savings that they had by using the currents to their advantage from the routing tool um, was huge. So we have all of these things set up. This is, as I said, critical to set up. And we've now got everything set up in those planning preferences. So I got Mums to come back here rather than going to the weather routing. Doesn't matter. This will transfer across to the weather routing, and away we go. So we've set up our boat, and we are now in the sail planning tool. This still uses the weather router. Um, this green point over here, let's zoom in a bit. This green point over here, this is my start waypoint. So I can put that there. I can actually, I can zoom in and I can be really accurate with my start waypoint. But for what we're doing today, we'll just roughly put it there. I can put in a lat long for it. I can also go to my current location if I have a GPS enabled device, um, and set that up. But yeah, I could manually put in the lat long in here as well for my start and my finish waypoint. So green is the start, red is the finish, and so I've got those set up where I want them. We're in planning, and so I'm actually looking at if I left today, tomorrow, the next day, or the day after, which one would give me a better passage. Obviously, this is a super long passage, so we're probably only, we're going to go out of our full forecast range. But um, if we can make those first few days good, then we can definitely pick a better departure time. So I've got my departure space by 24 hours, and my start time is now, and I've got my time for Pacific Auckland. I can actually change my time to Pacific Galapagos or Marquesas. So yeah, I can change that. I'm just, for simplicity, I'm going to leave it in Auckland because that's where I am, and I want to look at I'm doing a theoretical route and planning, so I want the times to make sense to me for where I am. If I'm in the offshore app will use the time zone of my computer. So wherever I am, I may want to change my time zone of my computer or my iPad or my tablet to whatever time zone I'm in. So I'll just click on the calculate route or the download button there, and it's going to give us 4 different departure times, and we'll just have a quick look at what those different departure times look like. I haven't run this route before starting the webinar, so we'll see how it goes. I've changed the polars, so we've got a few things to look at, but this is actually crunching some huge numbers at the moment. Yeah, the amount of data that is being calculated on our servers it's using all the highest resolution models. It's using those ocean and tidal currents, everything it can get its hands on. It's using at the moment. It knows what that polar is that I set up. It knows what my motoring settings are, and it's also going to look at my wave routing. So it's using that wind wave, the the wind wave, the primary, secondary, and tertiary swells for my route. So yeah, so see, it's thrown up a warning here, and what this warning is that I mean it's a super long passage, and I could probably even break this down into shorter chunks if I wanted to, but it's just saying that I have more than 4 days of motoring in this current route with my current with the settings I've put in. So it's good that it's given us that warning. So what we're looking at here is actually our departure plans for the 4 different times. And when we're using this tool, we don't actually look at the map too much. It's nice to look at, but what I will do is I'll just animate that out, and so you can see to sort of see what we're talking about. And so that's, this is our first departure, this is our second departure, this is our third departure, this is our fourth departure. So I've set them days apart. And I think we can probably already see that why we've got so much motoring in there is that we've got really light winds coming out of Panama, heading into Galapagos with some of these routes, or in this area here. So anyway, you'll see here we do have this warning. So I don't know what that is, but let's just have a little click. And so it's just it's a thunderstorm warning. So that's if we leave on our first departure date, that we will potentially run into this area of thunderstorms. Oops. But what we normally look at when we are doing departure planning is that we look at this tables view, and you'll see whichever time we leave, the actual passage time is, for such a huge passage, 20-day passage, not massively different. We've got 19 days as the shortest, and 20.8 days is the longest. I mean, that's here nor there. And we have a bunch of different things here. You see that first departure day, we do a day more motoring than if we left on the 4th day. So that's pretty interesting, that 4th day that we actually do less motoring than all the other days. Our maximum wind speed, minimum wind speed, this is throughout the whole passage. Average wind speed, maximum gust, cape. So that the first departure, we saw that we had that thunderstorm warning, and then we see here that we do get 3,000 kilojoules of atmospheric energy. So in our cape, our convective available potential energy. And so that number is probably indicative of that warning that we had there. For cape, if you have the cape value and rain together, then that's where we get the thunderstorm warning from. Amount of time upwind for the passage. Again, day 4, we spend less time sailing upwind. We saw that this boat doesn't sail upwind very well. Time reaching, time downwind. So again, more time reaching, less time downwind on this 4th day. But yeah, there's a lot of light winds. So, 33% of the time, 36% of the time, we're in less than 8 knots. But 8 to 20 the rest of the time, pretty nice. And we come down here and we have all our wave data. And we run out of our wave data time. So that only goes 10 days. So that's why it says percentage of time missing wave data. As you see further on, we run out of the wave data. But there's no time in the data that we have that we're over this 4 degrees of roll. So that's 4 degrees RMS. That's the root mean square. So there's no time that it looks super bad for that. There's no time that we're above 0.2 degrees of vertical acceleration. So that's great. And there's no boat slamming incidents that we can see. So none of these would influence our day of departure. But for me, just straight away looking at this, I'd probably go for this fourth one, because it looks like we have much more favorable conditions. This is obviously a really short-term thing, so we would have already decided that we're ready to go. Looked at the bigger picture in the wind maps, etc., and decided on our day. But so once we've decided which day we're going to depart, and you can even, as you get closer and closer to your departure, you can even look at this on a 6-hourly or even an hourly Hourly is probably a bit extreme for this passage, but doing a coastal passage you can do hourly, just to see how it affects your route. So once we'd run our departure planning, we would actually come into the sail routing and we would run our weather routing. So I could change it to 4 days from now, my start time to 4 days from now. I could come in here and move it to that day, 4 days from now. But let's pretend we're leaving today so that we get more of our forecast data. And I've just got those same places set, and I'll calculate the route and we'll see what we come up with. And so this is where, once we've decided on our departure, we then want to look more at our actual weather route. And this gives us more information than what we were looking at in the departure planning. And this is the tool that we also use while we're underway. Do not use the departure planning while you're underway. That's not the right tool for the job, and you don't get the information that you get in the weather routing. The weather routing is the tool that you use for your actual passage making. So you'll see again, we are calculating this route, and it will take a little while to crunch those numbers, maybe up to 30 seconds. And so if you're doing this on your, let's say you had an Iridium Go, or you're using this in the Offshore App, actually it sends this request off, crunches it on our servers, and then sends the compacted data back to you. It's a really nice way to do it. So yeah, it's cool. But you can use this or your iPad with the PredictWind app. Yeah, and you see we get that same warning about motoring, because I think we know that we've got a lot of motoring in this passage. I think this is 7 days we saw before. So I'll just click that away. It's very nice that that's given us that warning. This is actually pretty interesting here that we have two quite different routes. And it looks like one of them's really struggling with the light winds to get out of there. But for me, I would go with the consensus and the more traditional sort of route out of here, and follow this path down here. Now, and also when we see this sort of divergence, we go, oh, well, how do I know which one to follow? And to be fair, these other routes are actually following a pretty consistent pattern. But what we actually do is that we come up here, and if we look at, we've actually got 5 routes that are all doing the same thing to about here. So this is the path that we'd follow. And if I actually just move that forward in time, by the time we are here, we have a new forecast update anyway. So let's just leave that there, and then we've sailed to there, because that's an easy decision, right? We've got to there, and then we update our route, because the forecast has updated. We want to be updating our route every 12 hours after the forecast is updated, and we run our route from here. And then once we've run this one, we'll actually go and have a look at some of the other parameters that we can analyze for our route, and then go from there. So we'll give that a second to do. I'm checking out whether I want cold coffee. Not really. Not recommended. Yeah. So once that's calculated, we'll look at that, and and we'll see what our wave routing says, what our for the whole passage, any alarm bells, whether we get any warnings on the route or not, and and we still have our motoring warning. Interestingly, here we don't have any, there's none of these GMDSS warnings on our actual route, which is nice to see. We do have something up there, but it's a pretty long way away from where we are. And just before we go and look at anything else here, I'll just show you what happens as we go through this, and we get to the end of our. So the forecast period that we have is 10 days for our high resolution forecasting. And then once we get to the end of that, and it just did it there. So if I go back, once we get to the end of that 10 days, somewhere here, you'll see it, the screen changes, and you'll see all of these routes are actually come into line quite a lot. And that's because they all use the same data. And I'll just change over to the ECMWF. After the 10 days, the data we're looking at is the ECMWF ensemble data, which goes out to 30 days. In fact, I think that might even go out to 42 now. And that data is used to calculate the rest of our route. So and that's why they all start to look similar, but it gives us the data to complete our route, but there's no wave data in it, and that's why we run out of the wave data. So anyway, let's come back to where we were. Just wanted to explain what happens there with the ensemble data. And again, you know, I feel that all of our routes are pretty similar. And again, our forecast update will be here. You know, we can follow the consensus of the routes down here, or just sail our boat to a nice angle. Where we end up here is not super critical, but we're definitely heading in the right direction. You'll see here that we have a warning, and it's our thunderstorm warning. So that's something worth noting. You can also see when I click on it, you see the part of the route that warning is for. So if we motor forward to there, and let's have a look at why that is. So I can look at all my different parameters. At the moment, I'm on wind. I'm on the ECMWF model, and if I click over to rain, we will load our rain map. And the reason I want to look at the rain is to try and see what it is that's creating this thunderstorm warning. You can see that there's rain around at time, but not a lot. Anyway, let's go and have a look at the Cape. So the Cape is our convective available potential energy, and you can see we do, you know, I mean, there's much higher levels over here, but we do have elevated levels. And as we go further through this route, I'm sure we'd get more accurate data on, you know, what is, you know, triggering this warning. But we can look at these different parameters to decipher this stuff. So let's go back to where we are now, and you'll see that we don't have any high levels of Cape. And for the next, well, until we actually get that warning, we don't actually get any elevated levels where we are, because we've sailed away from this area up here. And so, yeah. Let's go and have a look at our currents and see what the router has done with us here. And it appears to be very nicely, for this short-term period here, seem to be very nicely using the currents to help us. So, obviously it can't, that's a balance between the wind and the currents. But you see, as we go further through this route and on that model, that we are going with the currents until we get to here. So there must be a very good reason. I guess there's no option but to cross, but it does look like the routing has given us at least a beam to it. So when we got to here, you know, obviously we would have updated our route lots of times, you know, along here. When we got to here, we would be wanting to look at this area of current. You can see it's really strong. So maybe I can't remember where that guy's going. Whether is he heading back to Galapagos? Hopefully he's got this pushing him now. But when we got to here and we saw that amount of current, something that I would want to look at is my wind direction at that point. If there is, and there's no wind, and because I was going to say normally we would get a wind against current warning if there was one, but that would only trigger if it was against the current and more than 12 knots of wind against the current. And you can see why we don't get the warning there, because we're probably, if I click on the route, we're motoring through that period there. So we can see we've got the M there, which means motoring, and our course, true, 234 degrees true. We're doing 4.2 knots because whilst we're motoring at 2 knots, we've got that current pushing against us as well. And the router's calculating all of that for us. So that's a nice thing to sort of know that you can do, is click on these routes at any point and see the information around it. And so we can see the current. If I click further down, we've got 1.2 knots of current, the direction, our direction, the waves. So we didn't look at the wave. Let's click on the wave parameter and we can have a look at the waves. And you can see that they're just heading from west to east in that region. So they're actually going with the current, which is nice. So we probably won't have too bad a motor through there. This could have changed by the time we get there because we're updating our forecast every 12 hours. Again, let's go and have a look at our tables. This is sort of where we can analyze all those things on the maps, but I really like looking at the graphs in particular. So this is for our entire route. We have our wind speed here. You can see that's at where it really drops down there, and this is obviously where we're doing all our motoring. And then it picks up again, true wind direction that we'll be sailing in. I mean, that later part of the trip actually looks pretty good. Sorry, that's our wind direction, but this is our true wind angle, which looks nice, and that, this is where we're doing our reaching and running. Rain, we can see our rain and our cape together. And so there's maybe where that period is, where that thinks that we're going to get the thunderstorms. That could be this area here, but the rain must be quite isolated. But again, we could look at that more closely as in a shorter time period. Temperature, pressure. Nice to look at what the pressure's doing, whether that's matching up with your barometer on board. Wave height, and you can see here we can actually look at the combined wind wave and swell. We can look at the wind wave, the primary swell, secondary swell, tertiary swell. And down here are our outputs for our wave routing. This passage looks good so far. The highest amount of roll in RMS, which is the root mean square, it's just the measure we use. We say anything above 4 is not nice. And so the highest we have it in any of the models is around 3 there, and most of the time we're around, around that 2 number or less, which is great. This is something that does need to be considered carefully, and so if we saw bad numbers here, we may wish to manipulate our route. We might slow our boat down so that we missed that particular area. And this is why you want to be updating your route the whole way along, with each time with the forecast update, because you'll be getting this new data the whole way along. And you may see something, because this is such a long passage, you may see something along the way that you decide, well, we're not going to sail into that, we're going to sail around it, or we're going to just slow down for a day so that weather system or whatever it is goes in front of us, or speed up even. get ahead of it, depending on what it is, what situation you're looking at. Again, the vertical acceleration isn't too bad. I'm pretty sure that's what would be expected for a passage like this. And we're sailing downwind most of the time, I think, from what I saw from that true wind angle. So there's no boat slamming. The boat slamming is when you're chopping wood sort of going into the breeze, or have an offset swell coming at you would cause you to sort of chop a lot in your boat slamming. So we do have a bunch of outputs here. The wind, we can look at each model, and for the short term, this can be quite nice looking at what true wind angle we'll be sailing, and what our expected speeds are, etc. So this is a nice way to look at your polar outputs. So in 12 knots of wind speed, at 150 true wind angle, do I really sail at 9.7 knots? Maybe you don't. Maybe you only do 9. So you might want to go in and adjust your polar. And you can look the whole way through this. And you see where we've got a little ship here. That's where we're motoring. And so some of the time we must have current going with us. So we're going, our speed over ground is faster than what we're motoring at. Our motoring speed was 6 knots. And then you see here when we get into that adverse current that we were looking at before, that we slow down, and we have that little warning there about the lightning. That's an interesting one. So, if we saw a big area of lightning, maybe we would slow down and not be in that, avoid that area. So, yeah, we can look at all the models there. We have a summary of the route, similar to what we saw in the departure planning, with all the different but we can look at all the different models, wind speeds, time up, wind, time reaching, the variation across those models. We do have our wave data in here as well. And whilst what we've looked at today there's nothing too bad in there, this is critical to look at and to keep an eye on. You don't want to. You can actually set yourself up to have a very nice passage versus a pretty nasty one. So what I am going to do now is stop sharing my screen and see that for whatever reason, is your camera completely off, Kieran? Or I don't know why your thing keeps showing up on the screen. What I will do is very briefly just share my Offshore App screen. So in here, I did a download before, and I think I must have had power settings in here. Anyhow, this is the Offshore App. You can see it looks very similar to what we just looked at, but it works quite differently. So this is where we can control our file sizes. I'll just move this up here. And our grib area and all that sort of thing. So I probably don't really have the time to go through this in detail, but a lot of things are very similar. Our green start waypoint, obviously we move that along our route, to wherever we are at that time, and we do our downloads. So I will quickly go through the download. So you'll see here as I move my start waypoint and I click on this grib button up here, I have this box, and this box is my grib area that I'm gonna download. So this is the area that I'm going to download, and I can control what that looks like, and this will control my file size. And so I can make that look like that and do whatever, I can manipulate that box. So, and something interesting about this is that if I wanted to, I could control this box, and I might want to do a really big area. If I wanted to look at I was interested, I saw something I saw a low pressure system or something in one of these areas, or there's an area of thunderstorms and I wanted to look at it, I could download a big area just to see that visually, and then I might just select one model, and I'll show you what I mean there. So I've got that grid area set up there. I've got my start waypoint. We've pretended we've sailed a long way through, and then I click on this download button, and you'll see here I have all of these different parameters I can control. And if I can click on this button here, and I can use offshore optimized settings. And what I should have done before that was showed you my file size, but you can see here my file size is 245 kilobytes, so it's really, really small. And I can actually take a bunch of these weather models off and see if it makes any difference to my file size. But the big thing would be the number of days, my time step, and my resolution. But I can reduce some models, and you'll see I'm down to 179 kilobytes. I've still got the ECMWF, the GFS, the Spire, and the UKMO. I'm getting wind pressure and rain. I might want to get Cape just for the part of the world that I'm going into. I can change my number of days. I could change it out to, don't know, let's say 8 days. See, when I changed the days, it went back up, but I can, you know, I could drop some models off and have the ECMWF and the Spire, or I could change, my grid area would also change my file size. Anyway, let's leave that at that size there. I'm getting the GMDSS graphical stuff in, and I click on that next button. I'm not getting the ocean data. So if I click on this button, get that ocean data, you'll see there 1.6 megabytes. If I'm on Starlink, that's not an issue at all. Even in Go Exec, you can probably do that. Yeah, so I've got my ocean currents there. Anyway, let's just keep that turned off. I can get satellite imagery if I wanted to look at some bigger area stuff, or I can rely on my GMDSS forecast. GPS tracking, I want to get that. I'm going to get the AIS data as well, just so I can show you what that looks like. So let's click on there. So that AIS data that we're getting in there, I'll just click on download all. I am on a web connection. I could have changed that connection type before if I was on a satellite device, as in like an Iridium Go or an Exec. I could have selected that type. You see here my downloads are happening, and it has the file size for each. So my ECMWF and my Spire, my GMDSS bulletins, my GPS tracking data, my AIS data. So this AIS data gives me a snapshot of now. So it's not as good as my over the horizon AIS, which shows me my VHF targets as well as my satellite targets, and can go onto any device. But it does give us a nice snapshot, and so we can plan our routes around it. So you see there, I've downloaded my route. It looks the same as what we were looking at in the other in the website just before, and I have all these same parameters, and I just want to come down here and check on my roll. And so again, we don't go above 4. We look pretty good there, really. A little bit rougher there. My vertical acceleration, again, we're not even above 0.1, and no boat slamming. So then if I come over here to my map, you see I've got my route. The GFS model here in green wants to take this southerly route, but every other model wants to go the same way, and we can play it through and look at all the same stuff that we did before. And so I only downloaded, because I'd done a download before, I have those other weather models there, but for this new area, I only downloaded the ECMWF and the Spire. And so that's what I'm looking at. But all of my routes, even though I didn't select those other grids, the routing still does the routing for all the models. So, and the fact that I've got such consensus between all of the models here, other than the GFS, um, I'm pretty comfortable that the ECMWF model that I'm visually looking at here is probably a pretty true representation of all these others. And if I scroll this through the timeline, you know, there's some small differences in the boat speed there of getting there. And the GFS is, just doing a different thing. And we could go and download the GFS model and have a look at why it wants us to go down there. And maybe it's because these light bits come down further in the GFS model or stay around longer. And you'll see here when we get to here and we run out of weather, that's our 8 days. So that's 8 days from here. We've got to here, and that's why it stops, because we only downloaded 8 days of Gribs, and then it stops. We don't have that data. But by then we would have done 16 downloads of new weather and got to here, and then we would do a new download and come and do the same process again. All right, cool. Okay, we'll end it there, and yeah, good luck with your passage, and yeah, thanks for coming along and listening.